For 30 years, the world believed Bill Gates was the smartest, kindest billionaire alive. He built that image on purpose, brick by brick, headline by headline. And it worked until it didn't. Because in the last few months, that mask has started to crack. Not from one scandal, from dozens, all surfacing at once. Unsealed emails, canceled appearances, a wife who finally stopped protecting him. Whatever questions remain there, those questions are for those people, and for even my ex-husband. Even she walked away. So today, we're going to do something most networks won't. We're going to trace the entire arc from a college dropout who cornered a market to a man who quietly became the largest private owner of farmland in America, to the photographs sitting inside the Epstein files with his face right next to women whose identities had to be blacked out for their own protection. This is not a story about money. Gates had enough money 40 years ago to disappear into a private island and never work again. This is a story about control, land, health systems, education, and eventually, your own identity. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a Harvard dropout became one of the most powerful, unelected men on the planet, and why his reputation is now collapsing faster than anyone expected. Let's start where it all began. Not with charity, with a monopoly. In the late 1980s, Bill Gates did something almost nobody in business history had managed before. He didn't just build a company, he built a choke point. By the late 80s, Microsoft controlled over 80% of the operating system market. Think about what that means. 8 out of every 10 computers on Earth ran through his gate, and once he had that control, he didn't share it. He bundled it. He packaged Word and Excel directly into the operating system so that competitors building separate software simply couldn't compete on price or convenience. It wasn't innovation in the way the press described it. It was a wall built around an entire industry, with Gates holding the only key. This made him the richest man in the world. It also made him a target. The government started circling. If Gates ended up across the table from senators who saw him as a threat to fair competition, his empire, and everything he'd built since he dropped out of Harvard, could come apart. He needed a way to change the conversation. Fast. And in 1994, he found it. Here's where the story most people know ends, and the story almost nobody tells begins. In 1994, with regulators closing in and public opinion turning against him, Gates founded his first charity. He named it after his father. On paper, it was philanthropy. In practice, it was a shield. We're a company that makes tools. Windows, it's a tool. Listen to how casually he dismisses his own dominance. He knew exactly what he had. He just needed the public looking somewhere else. So, while the Department of Justice was actively trying to force him to give up his new monopoly on internet browsers, Gates was quietly building something else. Not hospitals, not soup kitchens, scholarships, grants, direct donations to elite universities. In 1998, $20 million went to Duke, funding a fast-track program for high-performing students straight into the world of the elite. Why universities? Because that's where senators come from. That's where regulators come from. That's where the people who would eventually decide his company's fate had built their entire network of friends and favors. This wasn't generosity. It was infrastructure, and it worked. By the time Gates sat down for his Senate hearing, his net worth had nearly quintupled, from around $10 billion to over $46 billion in just 3 years. The hearing everyone expected to break him barely left a scratch, because by then, he wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was becoming something the public doesn't have a name for. A man with the money of a corporation and the soft power of a head of state. But behind that careful, rehearsed public image, something else was happening. Something Gates worked even harder to keep hidden. By the 2000s, Gates had perfected something economists now call philanthrocapitalism. It sounds harmless. It is not. Traditional charity gives food to the hungry and walks away. Philanthrocapitalism takes control of the investment, the data, and the policy, and never lets go. If we can find approaches that meet the needs of the poor in ways that generate profits for business and votes for politicians, we will have found a sustainable way to reduce inequity in the world. Read between the lines, profits for business, votes for politicians. Gates wasn't describing charity, he was describing leverage, and it gave him something money alone never could. Reach inside governments that no election could ever grant him. He became the second largest funder of the World Health Organization on Earth, a private citizen with no vote, no office, and no accountability to any taxpayer. Deciding where $500 million in global health funding would go. Think about that for a moment. An unelected man controlling more influence over global health policy than most elected presidents. And the same playbook, funding, access, and a carefully managed public image was being run by someone else in his orbit at exactly the same time. A man named Jeffrey Epstein. We'll get to that. But first, there's something even bigger that almost nobody is talking about. While the cameras were pointed at his charity work, Gates was quietly becoming the largest private owner of farmland in the entire United States. 250,000 acres. That's roughly the size of Hong Kong, owned by one man, spread across dozens of states, much of it acquired through shell companies that made the purchases nearly invisible to the public. Why does a software billionaire need 250,000 acres of dirt? Because land has always been the oldest form of power on Earth. Long before software, before banking, before oil, whoever controlled the land controlled the food, and whoever controlled the food controlled the people. Gates uses this land to test his own GMO seed programs, the same programs his foundation has pushed across Africa for 2 decades. The official story is feeding the world. The actual results tell a very different story. Agricultural production across the regions Gates has focused on most heavily has dropped, not risen, over the very period his foundation has been involved. Critics point to one reason. Farmers are pushed toward single export crops instead of the varied, resilient farming that actually feeds local communities. It's efficient for global markets. It's fragile for the people who actually have to eat. But here's what really matters. Owning the land doesn't just mean owning the harvest. It means having a permanent, legitimate seat at the table every single time a government discusses food policy, water rights, or land use. And once a man holds that seat in agriculture, healthcare, and education all at once, the next question becomes obvious. What does he want to control next? The answer might surprise you. And it connects directly to the scandal that's now finally catching up with him. For years, Bill Gates insisted his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was nothing more than a handful of charity dinners. It's factually true that I was only at dinners. I never went to the island. I never met any women. But the documents tell a different story. Inside Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, investigators found a framed dollar bill, signed in Gates' own handwriting with 3 words. I was wrong. In emails from that same period, Gates wrote to colleagues that Epstein's lifestyle was, quote, very different and kind of intriguing, although it would not work for me. Not exactly the language of a man who only showed up for dinner and left. And then there are the photographs. Multiple images from the Epstein files show Gates standing close to women whose faces had to be blacked out by the FBI, specifically to protect their identities as alleged victims. Bill has since been forced to admit, in a town hall with his own employees, to at least 2 affairs with Russian women during the same period, while his perfect marriage was still the centerpiece of his public image. No girl should ever be put in the situation that they were put in by Epstein, and what was going on with all of the various people around him. This is the same man who spent 30 years building a reputation as the world's wisest, gentlest billionaire. And it's the same charitable foundation, the same philanthropic shield that made it almost impossible for any of this to surface sooner. In February of 2026, shortly after these allegations resurfaced, Gates abruptly canceled a major public appearance at an AI summit. No detailed explanation, just gone. It was the first visible crack in 30 years of careful image management. But here's the part almost nobody is connecting yet. The same instinct that drove Gates to control land, food, and health policy is now driving an entirely new project. One that doesn't ask for your farmland, it asks for your identity. For the last several years, Gates has quietly backed something called the ID2020 Alliance. Its stated goal is simple: give every person on Earth, especially in developing nations, a digital identity. It's marketed as humanitarian aid, a way for the world's poorest people, those without birth certificates or paper records, to finally prove who they are. But strip away the marketing and ask the only question that actually matters. Who controls that system once it exists? A digital ID isn't just a piece of identification. It's a switch that can be turned off. If your bank account, your medical records, your vaccine status, and your ability to buy groceries all run through one digital system, then whoever controls that system controls your entire life. Not metaphorically, literally. This is the same man who already controls 250,000 acres of American farmland, the same man who already steers $500 million a year into the World Health Organization. Now layering a digital identity system on top of land, food, and health. Land tells you what gets grown. Health policy tells you what treatment you receive. And a digital identity system tells you whether you're even allowed to participate in society at all. Separately, these look like 3 unrelated business ventures from a tech billionaire with very expensive hobbies. Together, they start to look like something else entirely, a blueprint. So let's step back and look at the whole picture, not the headlines, the entire 30-year arc. A college dropout builds a monopoly so total that the federal government tries to break it apart. He survives that threat by building a charitable empire that buys him access to the universities, the regulators, and the governments that should have been watching him. He uses that access to become the largest private farmland owner in the country and one of the largest private funders of global health policy on Earth, all without a single vote ever being cast in his name. And behind that entire public arc, for decades, sat a private life he fought desperately to keep hidden. Affairs. A relationship with a convicted sex offender he insists was only dinners. Photographs the FBI had to redact to protect the women in them. None of this happened by accident, and none of it happened in isolation. The land, the health policy, the digital identity push, they all serve the exact same function. They put one unelected man closer to the levers that the rest of us have no say over. This is the uncomfortable truth most coverage won't say directly. Bill Gates didn't become one of the most powerful men on earth by being generous. He became powerful by understanding something most people never think about. That control over land, food, and health is far more valuable than cash. Because cash can be spent, but control over what people need to survive never runs out. The Epstein scandal isn't a separate story from the land deals or the health policy. It's the same man, the same instincts, the same 30-year pattern of building access and insulating himself from consequences, finally catching up with him in public all at once. So here's the question worth sitting with. If a man can spend 30 years quietly becoming this powerful while the world called him a philanthropist, how many others like him are doing the exact same thing right now, completely unnoticed? Let us know in the comments who you think deserves this kind of investigation next. And if you want to understand exactly how digital identity systems like ID 2020 are already being tested right now in real countries, on real people, that's a story we're going to tell in full very soon. Subscribe so you don't miss it.